Welcome to Focus on the News. We are very pleased today. We have a special guest with us, Elena Oelke. Elena is very interesting because she was born in what is presently Ukraine, and she's lived in Russia. So she's sort of a lady who has experience throughout the whole region. She's a businesswoman, an entrepreneur, and she ran for U.S. Congress in 2020 in that very strange election. Elena, you should have been elected, that's clear. But anyway, she's very well traveled, multilingual, has a stellar career working with international businesses overseas. So that, with that, welcome, Elena. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you, Senator. It is my honor and privilege to be on your show. Thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you for a great introduction.
Well, perhaps you could just enlarge on that just a little bit to let our listeners know a little bit more about you.
Excellent. I'd be happy to. I grew up, as many of you may remember, there used to be a country called USSR.
Very important country.
Yes, the Soviet Union. So that's where I grew up. I was born in the territory which is present-day Ukraine. At the time, it was called Ukrainian Republic, Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, because it was part of the United Soviet Socialist Republics Union, which was the Soviet Union. So at the time when I was born, Ukraine was, like I said, a part of USSR. But then as soon as I graduated university, it became an independent country. So Ukraine has been independent, I believe, since 1992, around that time. So it's a baby country, you would say, has been independent. But in my career, in my lifetime, I was well-traveled, and when I lived overseas, and I actually lived in Russia, I speak both Ukrainian and Russian. And my perspective comes from experience and knowledge and gives me a unique opportunity to compare what it was like before the independent Ukraine. I remember when it was like when Ukraine just became independent. And I can certainly see, and I have traveled back there to see what has become of the Ukraine of today. And that it grieves my heart to see the changes, especially with Zelensky and his regime. So I can see that the changes in independent Ukraine, unfortunately, quite sad to somebody who lived there, who can compare things and who has a point of reference. I did not read it on the CNN news. I did not watch it on Fox News. I lived it, and I understand the language. I know what people are saying. I know what people are saying there now, because I read and watch both media and both citizen journalists. So I'm pretty well aware of what's going on. So, and in my lifetime, being a businesswoman in United States, and as I ran for United States Congress, I'm American patriot. I'm America first. I'd like to see our country be responsible, and I would like to see our people being taken care of, and surely not start nuclear wars with nuclear powers around the world, which it looks like we're on the way with Russia in this entire Russia-Ukraine scenario. So with that little bit of introduction, I hope that helps.
Well, it's very good. You know, as you mentioned, the risk of nuclear war. Just last week, the Pentagon decided to send 2 huge B-52 nuclear-capable bombers on a strike run directed at, I don't know whether it was at St. Petersburg or Moscow, the 2 great countries in the western part of Russia. And they were making a a test run to see, exactly how they would launch nuclear cruise missiles to initiate what could conceivably be a Pearl Harbor style first strike with nuclear weapons on these major capital cities, or the capital city of Moscow and and St. Petersburg is almost like a second capital, but it's so the people who make the decisions, and we don't know precisely who made that decision, but it was an enormously provocative and very risky offensive action designed to trigger a defensive reaction by Russia, because Russia had to launch fighter jets to intercept these nuclear bombers headed towards their capital, and so there's a kind of insanity, and it worries me because I've seen this before, where I've seen it in business, where when the housing market was on the verge of collapsing because people with no income were being sold houses that cost $500,000 with full knowledge that the buyers could never make the first payment. And I would talk to all of these business developers who were some of them were my supporters. And I'd say, this can't go on because, people cannot afford to buy the houses you're selling. And they'd say, well, Joe and Bill, they think everything is okay. And I worry the same thing happens in foreign affairs, that you say, this is insane. Sooner or later, somebody's going to slip up. Maybe it's going to be on our side. Maybe it's going to be on the Russian side. Somebody will make a human error, because people are humans. They make mistakes. And this human error will trigger a nuclear war that'll kill 60% of the world's population. And I worry that they're saying, don't worry about that, because Bill thinks it's okay, and John Bolton thinks it's okay, and it's going to be okay. And they're sort of like the lemmings charging off the cliff, and they just feel like, okay, if all the other lemmings are going this way, good to go. I'll be safe because I've got lemmings on both sides of me, until they suddenly find themselves flying through the air to their death. And so I do worry. Well, listen, you mentioned, you said what people are saying in Ukraine, what they're thinking. Tell us, what are people thinking? What are they saying in Ukraine today?
Thank you for asking. Great question, Senator. If we look at the overall opinions of Ukrainian people, and opinion of their media, we do certainly see a certain picture. That's the same picture that Zelensky presents. That's the same picture that presents the Western media, that we're winning, we're going to, do away with Russia, we're going to take Crimea, Russia is incompetent, what have you. So that's their mainstream narrative. On the other side, the opinions of actual people, and I watch their personalities, who are opinion makers or influencers, you would think, they are very concerned with Putin's arrest, with Putin's death, with Putin never see the light of day. They are very concerned with basically destroying Russian Federation, and they would like to see Russia be a nuclear-free nation. Those are some of the top influencer personalities that are all over the social media. Some of them are invited to the Ukrainian mainstream media. Then there are regular Ukrainians. Regular Ukrainians have different categories. You look at the soldiers at the front lines. I watch the many different channels and follow many different accounts of Ukrainian volunteers. One of them is Alexei Oskir. he constantly posts on his TikToks, on his Telegram, that the soldiers from the front line contact him and ask him for help because some of their commanders are very corrupt. They take money away from soldiers' salary. Soldiers do not see the monthly payment that they're supposed to be receiving at the front line. And those soldiers are starting to make TikTok videos themselves saying, what are our Ukrainian parliament members are doing there, because they raised their own salary while allowing commanders to deduct the money from the frontline soldier for whatever offense, I don't know, didn't wake up on time. So Ukrainian soldiers are of opinion that some of the commanders are basically totally built corrupt empires off of this war. And some of Ukrainian soldiers make TikTok videos all the time and Telegram videos saying that once the war is over, they're going to go and dismiss or ask questions of all these corrupt politicians that are sitting there in parliament, do not go to the front line. They sent their children abroad to avoid draft, but the regular Ukrainian guy gets grabbed from the street, shoved into some type of a SUV and dragged over to the military commissariat and given the draft notices if they just go grocery shopping. Some people receive the notices when they're legally blind. And of course, we know mistakes happen, but there is more than one instance when Ukrainian soldiers are saying that sometimes when they witness corruption, they actually been killed by their own commanders. So they're not happy with some of their commanders. They're not happy with most of their politicians who are sitting in Ukrainian parliament. And a lot of them make official video messages to Zelensky and asking Zelensky why and when is he going to deal with corruption. So that's another category. Then there is volunteers. As I mentioned, Alexei Oskar, you can find him. He is on Telegram, he's on YouTube, he's everywhere, on TikTok. He says that he helps Ukrainian mothers and daughters look for their missing in action husbands and sons and family members. Because apparently Zelensky officials do not cooperate, so to speak, with the family members in such fashion where they would not provide some information to them. So a lot of mothers and daughters are very upset with the current situation. Some of them even wanted to go and do like a peace march downtown Kiev, Ukraine's capital. So there is that side of the story. Like I said, the society is divided, but then there is a divide between Eastern Ukrainians and Western Ukrainians, because the East is where the most of the war action is, near Donbass region. And then some of the people, when Russia's military operation started in 2022, ran away to the western side of Ukraine, which is closer to the Polish border. But what they're making videos of, and they're finding out that their fellow Ukrainians in the Western Ukraine are charging them double, triple, 10 times the rent. And they're saying, you're our own people. Why are you trying to capitalize on our grief? We are running away from war. You are Ukrainians, and you are basically making money. And what I've heard some volunteers say, and I don't have any proof to that, but I've heard different people suggest that a lot of people from Western Ukraine ran abroad and they receive benefits and social benefits from, let's say, Poland or whatever countries they ran as a refugee, while at home in Ukraine, they're renting their apartments over to the Ukrainian refugees from Eastern Ukraine and making sort of double dip. And I actually heard it from somebody in Ukraine. So there are a lot of scenarios. Ukrainian society is not, as you would think, to be homogenized. their media is basically all nationalized by Zelensky. There is no independent media. That volunteer that I mentioned, he has been harassed and brought to court day after day after day, put in jail because he speaks against the corruption in Ukrainian parliament, again, the theft of humanitarian aid. Again, you can go to his page, watch his videos, Alexei Oskir, TikTok, YouTube, find him. And he even has a video with he's speaking with somebody in English. I actually contacted him. I have recorded the phone interview with him. And what he told me, I asked him, I said, I'm American taxpayer. I would like to know, how is my money being spent in Ukraine? Because I said, when I see your videos, the guys from the front line sent you messages and phone calls that they have no weapons, they have no food, they have no uniform. Where is my American taxpayer money going then? And he says, I want to tell you this, he says, America is the Congress and America, they think you're helping us. But he said, all you're doing is by sending us more money, he said, is making our corruption bigger and growing our corrupt politicians' pockets. Yeah, it was very insightful. So all different types of opinions, Senator. Hope I didn't take on, sorry.
Well, very, very interesting. It's always interesting to get little glimpses of what's going on. Some probably 4 months ago, there was a very major document that was released surreptitiously from the Ukrainian secret archives, and it showed that there are about 35,000 missing in action from Ukraine. And this was not just a little 2 or 3 page document. This was a massive document that actually listed all of the names, the origins of all of the individuals, person by person, and it showed 35,000. Now, typically, when someone is missing in action, they have been killed. Not always. Sometimes they are recovered, but you figure, I would think a minimum of 30,000 of those have died in action, and apparently, the Ukrainian government is very reluctant to recognize that they have died, partly because they don't want to demoralize the people with the massive casualties they're taking, and partially because they just don't want to pay widows' benefits. So they avoid that by just saying, okay, we don't know what their status is. So this is a very big thing. Now, one of the things I'd like to touch on today, we have the situation with the International Criminal Court over there, and the ICC, which has its headquarters in The Hague, has issued an arrest warrant for President Putin, and it's a rather strange situation. It's a strange court, first of all, because interestingly, a court only acts where it has jurisdiction, a legitimate court. The very first thing that any court does when they receive a case is they look and they say, do I have jurisdiction over this case? If they don't, then they simply don't proceed. Now, it's interesting, the ICC, International Criminal Court, it only has jurisdiction of where countries have agreed to accept its jurisdiction. And it's been in operation for quite some time, because I was involved in drafting the original documents for the ICC.
Really? I didn't know that.
I hated to do it, but I was required. I was the chief of the criminal law division and required to do it. And
did you know Benjamin, what is it, Barons or Ference? I forget the name. The gentleman who participated in Nuremberg trials that were outspoken, and he wanted this to be founded?
No,
sure.
I did not. But the direction that I gave to the Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon was that because this was, in my view, a very dangerous enterprise, I wanted all of the due process protections that we would expect American soldiers to have. So we drafted it very carefully with all of these due process protections. And from there, it went to the U.S. State Department, where they stripped it all out. They knew this was a kangaroo court. It was a political court. That was the purpose. The purpose was for victor's justice. When you won the war, you'd go in, you'd find the other side guilty, you'd hang them like we did with Saddam Hussein, man who never did anything to us, but we decided that he had weapons of mass destruction. We took him out, put him on a gallows, dropped him down so far that it literally tore his head off from his body, and an innocent man. But we didn't like him. What the heck? We'll kill him. So that's victor's justice, and that's what the ICC court is. So they lack any pretense whatsoever of jurisdiction because they've been rejected by the US, by Russia, and by Ukraine. Not a single one of the countries involved has accepted their jurisdiction. But now the US and NATO have seen an opportunity to weaponize the court by setting them on President Putin and causing him some problems. So, and the US, NATO, they know there's no jurisdiction. They know there's not even a fig leaf of legality about this court. And it's so amateurish. I saw an indictment. I read it in detail, an indictment of Saif Gaddafi, the son of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And it was trash. It was a collection of newspaper articles, stuff that looked like the National Enquirer. And it's, oh, look at this, these exciting headlines that had no substance whatsoever. And that was the basis for their indictment of Saif Gaddafi. So it's just kangaroo court. But what I'd like to ask you about, the allegations made by this court with the charges against President Putin say that he was guilty of moving children out of the combat zone on the edge of Ukraine and moving those children into Russia. And what do you have any thoughts about the justification for doing that?
Well, the ICC, correct, International Criminal Court, they have an interesting history. As you so rightly mentioned, if we look at the entire organization and think that Russia has, I believe, withdrew its signature and never ratified any of that treaty, what is it called, Rome Statute,
yeah,
under which this was organized. My understanding that it is 123 countries that are part of this Rome Statute, and 41 countries not, including India, China, United States, Israel, and I believe Saudi Arabia and Turkey, however people pronounce that. And Russia withdrew their signatures, and I may be forgetting, I think Sudan also has withdrawn the signature. Don't quote me on that, guys, do your research. But with that entire organization, if you look at their activity and why they were founded, My understanding that UN had something to do with it, even though it's not part of UN, and they wanted to establish some type of a permanent international criminal justice court instead of having those temporary tribunals like they had the Nuremberg trials, for example. My understanding. But from what it seems, it just became another money operation, because the article of 2012, BBC, I think you guys find it, I read it the other day, it said something about that international court has spent, and the article is 2012. At that time, it was 900 million. So it's basically $1 billion in a decade of its existence. Google that article, guys. It'll be eye-opening. They have to pay rent. And of course, I'm in real estate. I'm a real estate developer and broker, so I understand what paying rent is all like on a large building that houses this type of operation. And I'm sure they don't have one office. They probably have multiple ones. So they have to pay staff, associates, and everything. And the article goes further to say, but they only prosecuted one case of a small Congolese militant at the decade of existence, and $900 million later. So what is the effectiveness, asks the article author, and saying that this court has been questioned for its effectiveness and for its purpose, and what they're really doing with all this money. You know, it's a lot of money, but the countries apparently contribute to that. So what's interesting about Mr. Putin's warrant for his arrest the other day, it's that I believe the warrant came on March 17th, but on March the 20th, guess what? They had a conference in London, I believe, where they say International Criminal Court had a conference where they discussed their business, and they got a 4.9 million donation to their operations. So to me, this all looks like a fundraiser. Let's issue warrant for Putin so we could get some funds. As soon as they issued warrant for Putin, all of a sudden they get some funding. They have some donations, $4.9 million. Google it up, guys. So what they're trying to do with making this a warrant for Mr. Putin, it's nothing short of, like I said, a fundraiser, a political stunt, because they know they have no jurisdiction. On the other hand, Ukraine, very strangely, I believe almost in 2013, gave ICC jurisdiction, even though it's not part of a Rome statute. But Ukraine now, the other day, I believe you also have seen that article, now gave ICC permission to establish their office in Ukraine.
Yeah,
correct?
So Ukraine will not allow the ICC to prosecute its citizens. It says you have no jurisdiction, but we will let you set up a prosecution office so that you can prosecute our enemies on the other side of the battle. I wonder if President Putin were to offer them enough money, maybe he could get them to set up an office in Russia to prosecute the Ukrainians for their war crimes, and sort of have a bidding war between the two. I mean, it's so corrupt. It's almost like a Peter Sellers comedy.
It is insane. Like I said, it's a fundraiser, because look at that. All of they're doing is now they're going to set up another office now in Ukraine. So they're going to have even more expenditures. And they figured, wait a minute, Ukraine's getting all the money. We can kind of be a nice little side story here and put our office, and maybe we'll get some money. Well, surely they did. 3 days later, $5 million drops on their heads. Well, what we call follow the money. And then again, some newspapers and news outlets are speculating that, of course, one of the German officials, I believe, foreign minister, said that if Mr. Putin arrives to Germany, we will have to arrest him. Of course, Russia brushed it off, but that was an awkward statement from Germany. Then some of the outlets speculate that BRICS are going to have the meeting, I believe, in August. So they're speculating that if Putin decides, Russian president decides to attend BRICS meeting, I believe it's going to be held in South Africa. There is something about South Africa, I believe, to be part of this Rome Statute and recognizing ICC. Don't quote me, guys, do your own research, but I think that that's what I read. And then they're speculating that Africa has not arrested, South Africa rather, has not arrested a certain other person that was sort of warranted by ICC and received a big backlash. So people are speculating, what if Putin does come? Will South Africa this time do something to Putin? Or will he be a no-show? Or, you know, on the BRICS. And if he will be a no-show, it's not going to look good for Putin to be a no-show. So there's lots of speculation. But if we talk about what actually they're implying to the President Putin and also the human rights, I believe, what is it? A Bund woman, her name, she is a human rights activist. There are two of them who are now issued this warrant for arrest. The lady who oversaw the evacuation of the children, which the International Criminal Court now considers some type of, deportation or genocide of sorts that includes deportation, while Russia insists there was just evacuation of the children to safety from the war zone. So if we go back and look at Western double standards, remember 1975, United States, Vietnam, Operation Baby Lift. Google it, guys. Baby Lift. You are a veteran of Vietnam War,
Sure.
Senator. Mm-hmm. What was the Operation Baby Lift? Do you remember that?
That's a good point, because we had very heroic evacuation of children, orphans, typically. In many cases, you had families who knew that they were going to be slaughtered when Ho Chi Minh's troops came in, and they literally thrust their babies into the hands of American soldiers, never knowing where they would go or anything, but just hoping that the blood of the family would survive somewhere in some part of the world. I want to touch on the situation with evacuating the children from these areas. First, it's really important for people to understand that the area that's being fought on or fought over in Ukraine is largely Russian speaking. Isn't that accurate?
Yes, that's very true.
Large percentage of the population speak Russian. They're cultural Russians, historically Russians. They relate to Russia, and they speak the Russian language. Now, for the children, for little children whose parents may have been killed in the war, or they may have been separated in some way, here they are in areas that no one can deny are bitterly fought over. And the idea that you would leave children to be exposed in places like Bakhmut and in some of the areas on the edge, I mean, that would be just inhuman to expose the children to these things. So what do the Russians do? The Russians move them out of the line of fire so that they will not be killed by a falling artillery shell or a sniper's bullet. They move them out. And where are they going to send them? These are Russian-speaking children. Are they going to send them to Ukraine, where they speak a foreign language, and where, honestly, it seems that many of the Ukrainians just absolutely hate people who speak Russian? Or are they going to move those orphans into Russia, where the children will be cared for by people who speak their native language and will care for them? And it seems to me like it would be inhuman for Russia, inhuman and also kind of impossible for Russia to move those children into the Ukrainian-speaking areas of Ukraine.
I think that we have to look at double standard here again. Remember that the war in Ukraine have been going on before Russia ever came in 2022. The war in Ukraine started in 2014, and it is the Ukrainian government who started what they call anti-terrorist operation or whatnot, and then they launched a bunch of military and assaults on the eastern Ukraine area of Donbass. Have they evacuated children before they bombed those cities?
Was Ukraine concerned about casualties among
No. Have they
these
evacuated
children?
anybody? No. So if we're in the West are trying to hold Vladimir Putin or any of the Russian officials to trying to save civilians, children, women, elderly alike, because Russia has evacuated some of the other areas with elderly and children and women and mothers and families, anybody who wished to evacuate away from the shelling. Because yes, people are dying in Ukraine under shelling every day, but they were also dying in Ukraine since 2014. And Ukraine has not evacuated those children. In fact, President Poroshenko, former president of Ukraine, on tape saying that, oh, our children will go to school, their children will sit in the basements, implying hiding from shelling. So has Ukraine evacuated any civilians or children from the harm's way? No. And when Russia does that, which my understanding under every military, I'm not sure if it's Hague or is it Geneva Convention, you have to evacuate civilians from the war zone, especially before starting any kind of offensives or anything like that. So if international court wants to look at what they consider Russia evacuating children would be some type of genocide, then let's look what Ukraine did to its own people since 2014. Oh, yes. And while we're at it, let's go and look what United States did in 1975 in Operation Baby Lift, when several thousand Vietnamese children were lifted on the airplanes and delivered to different countries, not only in the United States, majority of them. One of the planes actually crashed, killing 78 children. I believe that's on Wikipedia. You guys can look it up. But with that said, International Criminal Court has to look at all the cases, and also international law that provides for evacuation of civilians before it can blame trying to save children on Russia's president and their human rights persona. So it definitely screams a double standard here, because nobody's calling Ukraine out. Well, nobody's calling us for that matter, and Vietnamese children. But everybody is pointing fingers at Russia. Isn't that convenient? Well, because if you point fingers at Russia, you get money. Just like they just got that 4.9 million. It's a fundraiser. Well, it wouldn't surprise me if they will, now that they got this almost $5 million for that little stunt, now they will just issue warrants for everybody all day long. The money will keep pouring, right?
Well, it's very possible, but I think it's really important for people to think of the realities of the situation before you allow the mainstream media to sweep you away about these things. Would people really want little children who are orphaned to be left searching through the garbage with artillery shells exploding around them? No. No one would want that. So you need to have them evacuated. Who is there to evacuate them? The Russians are there. The Ukrainians aren't there to evacuate them, or they would have evacuated them before they left. So where should they be evacuated? Should they go to an area that speaks their language, or should they be cast into some bizarre world where nobody even speaks their language, where people literally hate and despise anyone who speaks the Russian language? I think the answer is pretty clear. I think the children were well cared for. But we're running to the end of our time. So Elena, I want to thank you for being with us and sharing your insights as someone who grew up in the Soviet Union and in the Ukrainian portion of the Soviet Union. So thank you very much. I'm sure people will be very interested in seeing you again in the future.
Thank you, Senator. It's my honor to be here, and I appreciate you inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.